Anyway, yes, good evening, everybody. And yeah, it's nice to be here. It was nice to be with you. I think it was, gosh, it seems a long time ago, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, to come down. It's very nice to come in on that occasion. It would have been nice to have been there in person tonight. But hey, there we are. The wonders of Zoom, etc. And here you go for 40 minutes or so on, not I Love You to the Moon and Back, but Moonbounce. And one of the questions that perhaps I want to try and answer is this bit of ham radio, this topic in ham radio, is this for me? I came into this about 8 months ago, I suppose. I'm doing it I'm interested in the propagation element of it. And I was interested to go into it simply to try and understand. And I guess the question really that I realized afterwards, perhaps I made the conclusion that I would do it before I actually thought too much about what it involved. So what I'm going to try and do is to illustrate what it does involve and explain a bit. But the question then is, for all of us, is this particular topic, is this subject, it could be, for example, VLF, it could be programming a radio for DMR and the network, the DMR networks. It could be anything. And we ask the question, is this something I want to go into? And Moonbounce is a very special thing in some ways, because I'll explain later, the threshold for entry is actually quite high to do it in any kind of repetitive fashion. So you have to make a deliberate decision that you're going into it because there's a fair bit involved. So anyway, I came into it about 8 months ago and said to myself, yes, I want to do this. I'm going to put up whatever antennas are needed. I'm going to do it. And that's where we are now. And you'll see what I've actually done. Not done a great deal, but I think I understand now, not just the journey that I've taken, but the journey that I'm going to take in order to do more of it. So there we are. So what happened? What has happened to me? Well, the simplest thing is that on the 21st of June, I'd been doing it. I'd put up some antennas, been fiddling around on receive for a bit. And on the 21st of June, I heard from the moon a CQ call from November Charlie 1 India, Frank Potts in, I think he's in Maine, I'm not sure, I can't remember. But I heard a CQ from him and elected that I would go back to him and see what happened with my setup. And of course, what happened was he came back to me, which was just great. So let's just take a quick look and see actually what happened on my screen. And you'll see there the classic WSJT screen, data modes screen, and you'll see the waterfall display, the blue thing, and you'll see some dots on it, and I'll explain those in a moment. But let's just run the video. It's only a few seconds. There we go. I think I was thinking there while that's going on, I think if you went down into the high street or whatever and said, hey, look at what I do, you'd get some very strange looks listening to noise and watching specks on the screen. Each of those specks, those who are used to FT8 will know the sort of thing. Each of those specks is a piece of information. Each of the specs are a symbol. Each symbol is formed into a word. The word is then coded and transmitted and decoded. And we have the a 60-second burst of a series of tones. Each of the specs is a tone. It's transmitted for 60 seconds. It's a very narrow band. We'll come to that, and narrow band transmission. You can just about hear, if you listened carefully, you could just about hear the tones, but quite difficult to hear. Just mostly you were hearing noise. There was the odd tone. And you'll see when I come to actually explain the data mode there, you'll see the synchronization tone down on the left-hand side. There's always that sync tone, and then the other tones are departures from the sync tone, which makes the Q65 transmission method very, very effective for this. So this was on 432.093. I knew he was on there. I found him and I replied. And you'll see there, I'm transmitting back to him and saying, hey, I'm getting you, and I'm giving him a signal report there of -20. That's 20 dB below the threshold. He's given me -25, and you'll see there that there's a Q number, Q3. That's telling you that the software is having trouble. It's had to go through a number of iterations to actually decode me, because I'm not, and indeed decode him. You'll see on the green. So there we are. NC1I via the moon on the 21st of June. So what just happened? Well, he transmitted. He pointed his antennas at the moon. I pointed my antennas at the moon. He transmitted some power, and a small amount of that power came back to me, and vice versa. The distance is, as you see there, about 370,000 kilometers, 403,000 at apogee, and a bit closer, 300 and I forget what it is, 60 something or 70 something at perigee. So the moon is there. We've transmitted to it, and we've received some signal back. So what was used? Well, on the right, you will see his array. And array is the right word. He has been doing this for quite a number of years, has Mr. Potts, Frank Potts. And he has the 48 UHF Yagis on a huge grid. Now, those mechanically minded can imagine this little lot. It's huge. Now, I'm going to tell you, he rotates it in azimuth in the first instance. That's easy. I rotate in the azimuth. My little lot over on the left-hand side rotates in azimuth. I can rotate in increase the elevation and point at the moon, and there I am pointing at the moon. But he can also swing this, rotate this thing axially. In other words, he can turn the whole frame round to make the antennas from vertical through all angles around, from horizontal all the way around to vertical. He can swing the whole thing. Imagine the feat, the engineering feat that is. He's been doing this, I should say, for about 25 years. That's maybe even 30. That array has appeared in a number of magazines, and it's huge. So he has 48 Yagis. I have 4. He has, and we'll come to the use of the term decibel, but he has 37 dBi gain, and I have a meager 22 dBi gain, because you get 3 dB for doubling the antennas and 3 dB for doubling them again. And so that's the arrangement. So quite an array, as Frank Potts, and he would be called one of the big guns. And this term comes up time and time again, big gun. And he has the equipment to carry this off and support lesser stations like me, and I'll come to even lesser stations later on. But first of all, in all cases, we have to know where the moon is. And the astronomers, of course, use RA, right ascension and declination. We're not interested in that. We're interested in where is it by way of azimuth and altitude. 107 on the compass, round to the east, and 39 degrees elevation up in the sky. The good thing about things like stellarium, this is the stellarium application, on the phone. And Stellarium allows you to basically know where the moon is at any point in time. And you see there, I've just dialed in Friday, 27th September at 0500, 0539. And that's where it is, 107 over in the east and up 39 degrees. So one of the fundamentals is you need to be able to steer those antennas by some means. That does not mean that it shouldn't be the Armstrong method. You know, just do it and set it by hand. But most people use rotators. Moonbounce then, before we go into the detail, it is complicated. And one of the thoughts that I've had certainly is it's very easy to feel quite small, quite ignorant of all the stuff that's bandying around, people putting in big dishes and multiple Yagis, as you've just seen. Wow. And it's very easy to think, wow, you know, these guys know far more than I do. But actually, everyone is certainly welcome, and anybody will communicate with you. Certainly, they're keen to communicate with new people. Another comment is that it's all about decibels. You'll see that later on. If you're bothered about decibels, don't be. It's just a figure of merit. It's a way of expressing gains, losses, and obviously losses. One of the biggest losses is between your station and the moon. So it's all about dBs, and actually it becomes quite easy when it is. Some people get very carried away and get involved in noise temperatures, which is kind of, whoa, okay, I'm not sure I understand. But if you stick to dBs, it's quite simple. It has a high starting threshold in the sense that if you want to do it regularly, then there's quite a lot. You've really got to get some kit, but you can do it at a very low level. For example, you can literally do Moonbounce with a long Yagi at 2 meters or at 70 centimeters, just with Yagis, and do it in your front garden, literally, just with a tripod, and put the antenna on the tripod. As long as you can point the antenna at the moon and update it every so often. The moon doesn't move that fast, but you do have to update it every so often. Then you can do it, but that's, of course, on occasion. If you want to actually participate repeatedly, then yeah, you've got to get some kit, and we'll look at that. There is a lot of information out there. So one of the first ones, if you're really just interested in, before you even do anything, to do anything, it's just go on to HB9Q, which is a club site, a group of chaps in Switzerland, and they run effectively a bulletin board, HB9Q, log on, and you will see the activity of the day, of that moment, in fact. You'll see what stations are on, who's talking to who, and that is probably the first port of call. There's also a number of Facebook groups. There's a EME Facebook group. That tends to get very carried away with noise temperatures and things like that, which is kind of, whoa, this is getting a bit technical. I think just let the technical bit gloss over you, and the Facebook is just as useful. Anyway, the transmission that's used is ultra narrowband. Those who have used FT8 will be aware. It's the same kind of thing. It's a bit more robust than FT8. And as I say, it uses some other concepts in order to overcome the problems of the path, of the channel, of the path between the channel that's supporting the transmission and the path to the moon and back. So it involves ultra narrowband, which is absolutely fantastic, and makes it nice and easy, a nice easy entry. The moon itself, well, you know it's kind of up there. It's a half moon at the moment. The average distance to the Earth, 385,000 kilometers. The interesting point is it rotates with a period of about 28 days, and it orbits the Earth with a period of about 28 days. Both are different, but what it does mean is that roughly it's the same face that you always see. Now, that's not particularly important from the viewpoint of radio. You could argue we don't care, but the point, simple observation is you're seeing the same face roughly. It does wobble a bit, and we'll come to that. So there is some special characteristics of the moon and the reflections from it. Importantly, and this is probably the fundamental, the average diameter is about 3,500 kilometers. So it's quite big. It might not be, it might not be that efficient at reflecting, but it's big. There's a lot of it to reflect. So it is a useful satellite up in the sky. It's like a billboard. It's there to reflect and does reflect. Useful and interesting to look at the past moon events. Those with any military background, here's a good one. 1948, United States had a electronic intelligence ELINT activity to monitor Russian radar, because it was the only way they could actually get signals from Russian radar. So they picked up the Russian radar that was being reflected, because there was some interesting Russian radars. There are always interesting Russian radars. The same was true in 1956, spy ship communications. There's an interesting one. It's the proxy server of the sky. You can't tell the sender's location. You can only tell that it came from the moon. That's not the sender's location. The first amateur was 53. And that's quite incredible when you consider that, that 1953 was the first amateur. You imagine the technology that was available then compared to that today. Then we get on to the thing you're very familiar with, the Apollo landings and the likes. And of course, they had to communicate with them. And then more recently, missions to the moon landers and the likes. And there was something, I forget where it was, it might have been in QST, where the Indian lander was like they were stating what frequency the Indian lander was on, and the thing was sitting there sending Morse, as well as all sorts of other telemetry, but quite interesting. And that was on 430 megs, just outside the amateur band. So Moon has been around a bit. We've been doing things with it for quite a bit. And now we're going to look at Moonbounce. I've split it into three. There are three bands in the novice band, if you like. If you're going to start, then start at 144 megs. That's easy. Or start at 432. 1296 is more complicated. The regulators are about to mandate that you must use a 3-meter dish. 3-meter dish is quite a big dish to stick in your back garden. So probably 2 meters and 77s is better. 1296 is more activity, and there's huge activity. People getting enormous dishes and the likes. I've called the other bands, the higher bands, 3.4 gigs, 10 gigs, etc., the microwave engineering bands. But of course, with ICOM introducing a radio that now runs up to 10 gigs, maybe it's not. But certainly when you get up into the 47 gigs and further, you're starting to build your own kit. And then I just labeled the crazy folks bands, people trying to do Moonbounce, doing Moonbounce, never mind trying, at 28 megs, 50 and 70. The array size, the antenna size at these frequencies is just silly. So I just labeled it as crazy folks. But you're going to start, the place to start is probably 2 meters or 70 centimeters. And if you're really enthusiastic and prepared to grasp all of the issues that there are in 1296, then that's probably a good one as well. So what happens with the moon? Let's get into the detail. It reflects, but of course it's not not a perfect reflector. First of all, it's not a straightforward billboard. It's not a sphere, sorry, a flat reflector. It's a sphere, and it's rough in parts. So reflections, in some cases, will not go straight back to the Earth. They'll go off into space. You can see those at the top and the bottom. They're simply going off into space. It's reflecting, but the reflection is bouncing off, and so we're not getting a perfect reflection there. But nonetheless, there is some adequate reflection, and that's the important point. Most of the reflection is coming from the middle of the moon. It's a debate as to how, if you were modeling it, would you say that 70% of the surface? Would you say that it's 30% of the surface? It's a bit of a debate. There's an argument about how much of the moon really is an adequate reflector. The point is, it reflects. There are huge losses involved, massive losses, which, if the moon wasn't that as big as it is, would be showstoppers. So you've got this massive 187 dBi loss going out. It hits the moon, and if the moon wasn't big, if the moon was just a point source, an isotropic radiator, then back would come another 187. You'd have 370 dBi of loss, and the world would end. You might as well give up because it wouldn't work. But the moon is big, and it has an effective gain of 143 dB. Add them all together, you get a round trip loss of something like 245 to 250 dB. That is just workable. And we'll see with what it's just workable. Here we go. My own calculations when I was looking at this basically say if you've got 4 Yagis at 432, same at 2 meters. The good thing about 2 meters is path loss is slightly less, but the reflection is not as efficient, so it kind of balances out, and we end up with this 245 dBi loss. But if you've got 4 Yagis, a low noise amplifier, 500 watts, come to that. If you're running that kind of station and the other person is running that kind of station too, then you're working. The problem comes when you decide that you want to get started and you go ahead with 1 Yagi and 25 watts, and the dBs don't add up. You don't manage then to bridge the 245 dB gap, and that is an issue. But what it means is that people like Frank Potts, NC1I, come to the rescue with these huge antennas, and for what you don't have in your gains and powers and the likes, they have. And so they're very keen as well to get new people, so it works. But it is a question of balance. What you don't have, they must have at the other end. And if they don't have, it won't work. I had somebody on the other day desperate to communicate with me saying, please, please, please. And I said, okay, well, we'll try it, but we're about 10 dB light. And it didn't work. That was the end of the matter. It didn't work, and it wouldn't have worked. And this is maybe one of the things about Moonbounce. You don't put up an antenna, switch your radio on, and call CQ. You've got some thought to put into it to decide where you're going to hit it. Are you going to just do it for fun, for 2 or 3 or 4, to get 2 or 3 or 4 of these big guns and say, yeah, that was fun. I did that. That was a nice sunny day, and I stood outside and pointed the antennas, and it worked. So it is a question of balance. What you don't bring to the party, the other person must bring to the party. So the whole thing's doable, but there are complexities. I'm going to spin over quickly some of the issues. It isn't, I've made it sound at the moment like 245 dBi, do your maths, point the antennas, turn on SJT, and it'll all work. Yes, but there are lots of things that will go wrong. And in many ways, that's the fun thing. It's the stuff that will go wrong that's the fun thing. So let's have a look. First of all, and I missed pointing this out, the moon wobbles. It wobbles and nods. And it's called libration. It's useful to the astronomers because they can see bits of the dark side of the moon. Not much, 10%, something like that. But in effect, the moon is just wobbling back and forth, nodding and wobbling. So you get with that, and it's the same. You all experience fading, particularly those who operate mobile. You'll operate mobile and you'll drive up to a traffic lights and you'll park in a deep fade. Certainly in the days before digital services, you'll park in a fade, it'll hiss out, and that's that. Then you move forward a few meters and it comes back. Same idea, you land in a deep fade. This fading occurs a lot at the extremes of distance, at the apogee right at the furthest distance and the perigee nearest. When the moon's actually sort of moving between the two max and min distances, the libration fading is not quite as great. So there's some fading. You could say, okay, I'm not running CW, so I don't have to worry about this sort of thing, because the coding in the data signal takes care of this. There's so much redundancy in the coding that you don't have to worry too much about this. If you're going to run CW, and people do, to do it, then that's a different ball game, because you're trying to receive CW in the presence of deep fades, and that's quite difficult. But in terms of the WSJT stuff and Q65B transmission system, then you don't have to worry. Click the box, click the relevant bits in the program, and away you go. Another one that's interesting, though, is Faraday rotation. Faraday rotation is simply you point your signal, let's say in this case vertical, you launch it vertical in the middle there, and you are launching, and we all know about the Earth's magnetic field from the last night or so with the auroras. But what happens there is that the Earth's magnetic field distorts the signal and distorts it from, in this case, vertical, and pulls it round into horizontal, which means then that, of course, you've instantly it's the same as on 2 meters. You launch horizontal and you're trying to talk to somebody in vertical, you have a good loss, a big loss. And so Faraday rotation, that's particularly relevant when the geometry is such that you're actually going out and skating through the ionosphere. If you're pointing straight, well, you won't be pointing straight up at the moon, but if you're pointing up at a high angle to the moon, this is less of an issue. So sometimes people will make the comment online, we didn't manage to make it, it must be Faraday. Who knows? All you know is you didn't make it. You don't really know what caused the loss and knocked the communications out. There's also the other thing, which is a little bit, I'm not sure I've actually got the diagram best to explain here, but if you launch it horizontal, you hit the moon and you come back to another point on the Earth's surface, then if you follow my ray there, you may end up where the distance station is trying to receive you in horizontal, but actually their antenna, the polarization is coming in vertically polarized. And so you launch it horizontal, but because of the geometry of the thing, you come in on vertical, which means that you've got you've got a loss. And every time, of course, you do orthogonal polarization, you've got a loss. So there are people who have given some quite good guidance on this, where they say, well, if you're going east to west, then you launch horizontal, it'll arrive vertical, but west to east, etc. There are some matrices that I've seen. For me, I don't think about it too much. I just simply think, well, I'm going to try. If I can't do it, I'm not going to get into the detail of whether or not the geometry of the whole thing, Earth to moon and back, is actually naturally rotating my polarization. So these are things that are just getting in the way. They're not things that you, in some senses, I remember somebody saying on one of the forums when I asked a question about something, and they said, don't overthink it, just do it. And that's probably quite reasonable. I like to understand, but sometimes in a lot of this stuff, you can understand it, but there's not much you can do about it. If, for example, Faraday rotation is there, too bad. You'll just have to try again another day. some people just coming to the single yagi pointing at the moon as the moon rises or at the moon set, it is possible to get ground reflections, so-called ground gain. Basically, what happens is that the reflection coming in from the ground adds, it constructively interferes, it adds to the signal direct from the moon, and you get anything up to a 6 decibel addition for nothing. It only happens while the moon is rising and setting, and shortly after rise, shortly after set, it's gone. But some people do. For example, people who have fixed elevation antennas where they can't simply jack the azimuth up, and they can't track the moon, but they can track the azimuth, but they can't track the elevation. In other words, somebody who's got a 2 meter or a 70 centimeter yagi, and they want to have a go. And the time perhaps to try and have a go is at moonset and moonrise, because you get a little bit of ground gain. And the other thing, of course, is that the sky is noisy. You'll notice if you've got a good antenna system, if you point at the cold sky and then you move across and point at the sun, you should be able to see quite a significant rise in signal, because the sun is noisy. It's a noisy radio source. And so is the Milky Way. The Milky Way has got a lot of noise coming from it, not as much as the sun. You'll see there that one of the receiver noise on the y-axis is in degrees Kelvin. But that sun noise represents something like 10 decibels. If the moon is in the same quadrant as the same region of the sky as the sun, and you're effectively pointing at the moon, but actually the sun is there in your beam width of your antenna, then you're going to get noise, in which case you probably won't succeed. Same with the Milky Way. So what you've got to do is to choose a time when the sun is not in the Milky Way, is not in the sun, and the background to the moon is cold sky. And that's part of the sort of determining when you might try. There's nothing stopping you trying when it's a bit noisy, but the chances of success are lower. So there's some things getting in the way. But let's move on to this, to perhaps how you would set up and what the data modes are and the likes. Today's favorite mode, as you know, these things change. Today's favorite mode is Q65, 60B, 60 is 60 seconds. And that's the Joe Taylor, WSJT author. That's his recommended signaling system, and that works. It has a sensitivity of about negative 28 decibels below the receiver sensitivity of at the 2.5 kilohertz bandwidth sensitivity. So it's basically receiving, and you saw it with those tones, and I'll put them on at the end again. You saw it with those tones. You could just about hear the tone, maybe, but mostly it's just noise. And the signal is in the noise. And the software is pulling the signal out of the noise. CW, just as a reference, is anything from kind of 0 dB. In other words, you can just about hear it on the noise. Some people would say, some good Morse operators would say that they can actually receive CW at maybe up to 15 decibels below. And in that scenario, all you are hearing, in fact, is hiss. You're hearing a change of hiss. Because you're seeing a little bit more noise in the bandwidth. I've never done it, but I certainly can imagine what it involves. You must be a fantastic operator to just hear that kind of slight elevation in noise. Whereas normally, of course, people are listening to a tone, and the tone is well above the noise. The signal is well above the noise. Here we're talking about stuff well below. The important thing is this business of the synchronization tones. You see the sync tone on the left, on the diagram on the right-hand side. You see this sort of near continuous bar that runs down the left-hand side. That's the sync tone. And then other tones are the little bars out to the right from that. Looks like a bicycle chain or something like that. That is the use of the sync zone. So in fact, if the frequency is shifted, then as long as the software can determine where that sync tone is, it can decode, because it doesn't care what the sync tone actually was, provided it's within capture. It doesn't actually care what it is. So, so you've got this notion of sync tone and tones departing away from that out to the right, which it then decodes. And that means it's good at coping with Doppler shift, because it doesn't matter what frequency, within reason, the frequency is, you'll be able to decode. Other modes, yeah, I mentioned CW. Some people love the idea of saying hello moon with an SSB signal. You need one heck of a power and a huge antenna array to be able to say hello moon and then hear your moon, hear your voice come back saying hello moon, and see that return of that signal 2.7 seconds later. But you need a lot of power and a lot of signal, because you need typically plus 10 dB of signal to noise. So that's typically what's used. So what's needed? What do we need to actually kick off? Well, I mentioned I've gone down the road of LNA, 4-unit, 4-Yagi array, and 500 watts. I'm not there with the 500 watts yet. I've got a rig. I've got a sequencer so that I don't blow my low noise amplifier up with my PA, so that I shut down the low noise amp before I send, but that's all standard stuff. If you're doing 1296, then you will need a high stability oscillator if you're going to use the IC9700, which is the thing I've got, simply because ICOM haven't put adequate stability in the signal, in the frequency of the radio. And as a result, people have done workarounds where you basically mod the radio to put a high stability oscillator in. That apart, if you're doing it at 2 meters and 70 cents, you don't need that. And of course, I did mention that you can get away with a single antenna, just a long Yagi. It's just that you'll only work the big guns, but that's okay. Then, of course, you need a laptop running the Q65, and I use WSJT. And if you wish to, then you would want tracking. If you use 1296, maybe we make the comment, I'm not sure if I've got a slide on this. If you're using 1296 megs, 23 SEMS, then you are going to, the requirements, because your beam width with a dish is a lot narrower, you're going to need a better rotator system. My rotator system is not a problem because I'm using 4 Yagis, and it's quite a wide beam width. There's plenty of support. I did say that, you know, it's we're not without the support. There's plenty of people in the EME world who are keen to help. The first thing is probably the hb9q.ch, and there's lots of people there. You'll see the sort of back chat that's going on. Thanks, good try. Try that. We'll try that later. Blah blah blah. And then, of course, the Facebook group, EME Moonbounce Radio Communications. So there's plenty of support, and you will see a lot of people's kit. People are very keen on showing their kit, and it's really quite a good idea, particularly when it comes to amplifiers and the likes. You can start to see what people are using, which is great. So how does it look when you do it? What do you do in doing EME? Well, the start point is, can I see the moon? That's, you know, I think I'll go and do some Moonbounce. Okay, can you see the moon? That's where you use the stellarium or other application to say, where is the moon? Can I see the moon? The next thing you're going to do is log on to HB9Q, because that's where everybody is who's currently on, and you'll get a big long list of all those active. The next one is that you then start to monitor the frequencies. You'll see that somebody's transmitting on 432.093, and you'll spin to that and monitor whatever's going on. And you'll see on the HP9Q how that progressed, and if you get a feeling about whether or not your system, you're going to be able to play. Can I play? Have I got the system that can do this? You then might message one of the players, hey, you're calling CQ. I'd like to have a go and try. Oh, okay, yeah, do that. So away you go. There's no point in, incidentally, 3 or 4 people all blasting away. Although you can shift the audio frequencies and have, just in the same way as you can with FT8, you can shift the audio frequencies and have multiple conversations, if you like. But you're going to say to somebody, let's try. You then try. You turn the thing to transmit, and away you go. It won't work first time. You will potentially have to reply 10 times. And you might take 10 minutes, you might even take 20 minutes to complete the QSO. With all the various different propagation things, mechanisms, and issues that I was mentioning, it may take you anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes to finish the QSO. And then you'll work a few, you'll go back and monitor a few more, see if you can work, you'll try somebody, and it won't work, and you'll give up on that, and you'll come back for another day. And that's literally the way it progresses. The challenge, of course, is overcoming all of the issues, and that's where the fun comes in, is overcoming the technical elements of it. So that's it, really. That's where I come in when it comes to Moonbounce. I have had now 3 communications. They've all been with, certainly 2 of them were the big guns, and one was kind of somewhat bigger array than I've got. So I suppose you'd call them a big gun. But I've had 3 so far, and I've kind of backed off at the moment because I need to get power. I need to get myself a power amplifier. So I'm focusing on building the PA. But just to remind you, and you can maybe see here or hear here, you might be able to see the tones. You'll be able to see, incidentally, some repetition. And I should point out in the waterfall here, the bit, I don't know whether you can see my cursor, but the larger gap is the 60 seconds. And the smaller gap is a wait period. I can't remember what it is. I think it's 3 seconds, maybe a bit more than that by the looks of it. And so you've got these transmissions, and then wait, and then transmission. The whole thing is synchronized, which is why you can tell whether it's a Moonbounce signal. There's a lot of people who say, oh, it's a Moonbounce signal. Well, no, they're only down the road. You were actually communicating through the troposphere. You were not going, because we can tell, because the signal was back in milliseconds. It takes 2.7 seconds for a signal to go all the way to the moon and all the way back. And we know that we can measure that, and we can say, yes, that was a Moonbounce signal, simply because everything is synchronized. So you have to have an internet connection in order to synchronize. But I'll just put this back on again, and you'll see. You can see that repetition between the 2 60-second blocks. There's a kind of string of tones in both of them. I suspect those are actually both CQ calls. And if you dream a bit, you can hear the tones. There we are. So that's literally what doing Moonbounce is about. It's monitoring those transmissions and participating and endeavoring to have a two-way communication despite all the issues. So there we are. Moonbounce. I came in about 8 months ago, decided I'd like to have a go at this, and put up some antennas, got myself some bits and pieces. I've now realized that I do need 500 watts because I would like to have communicated with some others. And you'll see in the case of Frank Potts, it was I was late by something like about 10 decibels because I'm only radiating, I'm only putting to the antenna about 50 watts. And I could do with putting to the antenna 500 watts. And that 10 dB, remember I said it, or dBs matter, and what I don't bring to the party, somebody else has to bring to the party with their antenna system and the likes. So my next thing is to go for the 500 watts. I need to write some Python to get my tracking working. I've got the tracking in principle able to work, but I need to write some software just a little routine. I've got the basis of it there, to cause the antenna to follow the moon. And there are lots of things to help you there. One of the things is that the azimuth and elevation are actually reported inside WSJT. And all you have to do is read that and then tell your rotator where to point the antennas. So that's my little array, 4 elements. Low noise amp as the block below the rotator. It's a rotator in azimuth and elevation. There's a combiner somewhere in the middle there. And it works, and it works well, and I can do well and receive. But I need to get myself 500 watts to really participate. But for now, I'm very pleased. I got Frank Potts' QSL card. Very pleased about that. And he's certainly somebody it shows you the enthusiasm. The guy's been doing it for 25, 30 years. He's got that huge array. He could say, well, yeah, I'm going to start to be a bit selective, but he's quite happy to QSL anybody that communicates with him, which is super. So there we are. Moonbounce, is this bit of ham radio for me? Well, there's some technical bits in it, which is quite fun. There's a lot of learning to be done in it in order to do it well. It's technical. It's a big challenge. It's long term. It's not something you pick up tomorrow and say, I'm going to start doing that and do it there and then. Although you can do, as I say, 1 or 2. You can do it with a single Yagi and get yourself a few Moonbounce stations and enjoy it, and then say, that's enough. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in building anything else. So you can take it at many levels. I will personally try to take it at the level which is where I'm able to participate with other stations of the same size and complexity as me, and that I don't always rely on the big guns. But there we are, Moonbounce. It's fun. It's challenging, and I'll let you know in another year how many more QSOs I've had. So at that point, I think, Alan, I'll stop, and if there are any questions, then we can perhaps take them now.